I couldn't shake the dream. It clung to me like wet clothes, cold and uncomfortable, even after I woke up. It started 2 months ago, the first time I saw her on that bridge. Elena, my wife of 10 years, was standing there, her back to me. The fog was thick, curling around the wooden beams of the old bridge like ghostly fingers. She wasn't alone. There was a man beside her, faceless and shadowed, but close, too close. I shouted her name, the sound tearing through the fog. She didn't turn. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she reached out, took the man's hand, and walked away. Every time the dream ended the same way, with her disappearing into the mist and me standing there, powerless, screaming into nothingness. I woke up gasping again that morning, the sheets twisted around my legs. My chest was slick with sweat, the room suffocatingly warm, even though it was winter. Elena stirred beside me, her hair spilling across her pillow in messy waves. She looked peaceful, like nothing in the world could touch her. Just a dream, I muttered, running a hand down my face. But it didn't feel like just a dream. I tried to convince myself it was stress. Work had been a mess lately. Teaching middle schoolers wasn't exactly a walk in the park, especially this close to the holidays. I was staying late at school more often, dealing with disciplinary meetings and piles of essays. Sleep was bound to get weird when life was chaotic, right? But the dreams wouldn't stop. They came back night after night, always the same bridge, always the same man. Except now I started noticing new details. The way Elena would glance up at him, her smile soft and warm, the kind she used to reserve for me. The way her hand lingered in his, like it belonged there. It was subtle, intimate, too damn intimate. I didn't want to bring it up to her. I mean, how do you tell your wife, hey, I've been having these weird dreams where you're with someone else? She'd think I was crazy, or worse, paranoid. But the dreams started bleeding into my days. I'd catch myself staring at her, searching for signs of something, anything. Jason, she said one night, snapping me out of it. I'd been watching her as she sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, her eyebrows furrowed. Are you okay? You've been kind of distant lately. I shook my head, forcing a smile. Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired. Work's been a lot. She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. You should take a break. Maybe we both should. The thing is, she'd been acting distant too. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but little things started piling up. She was on her phone more than usual, her face lighting up with soft smiles at messages I couldn't see. She'd been forgetting things too. Small things like our standing coffee date on Sundays. When I brought it up, she'd laugh it off, blaming work. You know how it is, she'd say. The client wants something done yesterday, and I'm the one who has to make it happen. But it didn't sit right with me. Elena was always organized, meticulous even. Forgetting something like that wasn't her. The dreams were eating away at me. I started waking up earlier just to avoid falling back into them. One morning, after another sleepless night, I found myself staring at her again. She was sitting at the breakfast table, sipping her coffee, her hair still messy from sleep. What did you dream about last night? I asked, trying to sound casual. Her eyes flicked up to me, and for a second something flashed across her face. Something unreadable. She shrugged, her lips curving into a small smile. Nothing really, just random stuff. Why? Just curious, I said, taking a sip of my own coffee. But her answer didn't sit right with me. I started paying more attention. She was leaving the house earlier than usual, claiming she had back-to-back meetings. When she came home, she seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. Once I caught her staring at her phone, her face unreadable, before she quickly locked the screen and set it face down on the table. I told myself I was being ridiculous. She's your wife, I reminded myself. She loves you. Stop acting like a paranoid idiot. But then I started noticing other things. Things I couldn't explain away. Like the night I found a half-full glass of wine on the kitchen counter after she'd gone to bed. Elena wasn't the type to drink alone, or the time she came home with a scarf I'd never seen before, claiming she'd bought it weeks ago. The dreams kept coming, more vivid and cruel than ever. I started to dread sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her walking away from me, her hand in his, her smile for him. One night, I woke up to find her side of the bed empty. Panic surged through me as I sat up, my heart racing. But then I heard the faint sound of the faucet running in the bathroom. I let out a shaky breath, lying back down as my pulse slowed. But something wasn't right. The dreams, the small changes in her behavior. It was starting to feel like more than coincidence. And I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. I couldn't tell you when the unease fully settled in. Maybe it was a slow drip, or maybe it slammed into me all at once. Either way, I couldn't shake it. Something about Elena was different. The things I used to overlook, like her occasional forgetfulness or her quick glances at her phone, now seemed glaring. Like that night she came home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. I noticed it the second she walked through the door. Elena never wore heavy fragrances. She liked clean, subtle scents, lavender, sometimes vanilla, but this was different. It was sharp, floral, and too bold to be hers. "Long day?" I asked, forcing my tone to stay light. She smiled, her usual warm smile, and set her bag down on the kitchen counter. "You have no idea. I swear, if one more client pushes a deadline on me, I'm going to scream." I watched her move through the kitchen, her hands busy with small tasks. She poured a glass of water, opened the fridge, then closed it without grabbing anything. She was always like that after work, needing a few moments to decompress. But tonight, something felt off. "You smell different," I said before I could stop myself. She froze for just a second, so quick I almost missed it. Then she laughed, turning to look at me over her shoulder. "What?" "It's probably from the office. One of the women brought in some fancy candles, and the whole place smells like a department store now." I nodded slowly, pretending to buy it, but my gut was screaming at me that it wasn't true. The thing is, Elena was good at brushing things off. She had this way of making you feel like you were the crazy one for even asking. And maybe I was. Maybe I was letting these damn dreams mess with my head. But it didn't stop me from noticing the way she avoided my eyes as she said it, or how quickly she changed the subject. "You hungry?" "I can heat up the leftovers from last night," she offered, already heading for the fridge again. "No, I'm good," I said. My appetite had vanished. Over the next few weeks, it got harder to ignore. Elena's routine was shifting in subtle but noticeable ways. She started dressing a little nicer for work, heels instead of flats, lipstick instead of her usual chapstick. "You're really stepping up your game at the office, huh?" I teased one morning, watching her smooth out the hem of her blouse. She smiled, but it didn't feel real. "You know how it is. Gotta dress the part if you want people to take you seriously." It was a perfectly reasonable answer, but the dreams kept coming, and with them, the doubt. The worst part was, I didn't know how to talk to her about it without sounding insane. "Hey honey, I keep having dreams where you're holding hands with some mystery guy. Care to explain?" Yeah, that would go over great. Instead, I started paying closer attention. I didn't mean to snoop. It wasn't like I was going through her phone or following her around town, but I couldn't help noticing things. Like how she always seemed to be texting someone lately, her phone angled just enough that I couldn't see the screen. Or how she'd laugh at messages and then quickly lock her phone when I walked into the room. One night, I decided to test the waters. We were on the couch watching some show she'd picked, and she was scrolling on her phone like usual. "Who's that?" I asked casually, nodding toward the screen. She looked up, her expression calm. "Just Megan from work. She's complaining about her boyfriend again. Poor guy can't do anything right." I chuckled, but something about her tone felt rehearsed, like she'd been waiting for me to ask. Then there was the scarf. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Elena was out running errands while I stayed home grading papers. When she came back, she had a shopping bag in her hand and a new scarf around her neck. "Nice scarf," I said as she dropped the bag on the counter. "Thanks," she said, brushing it off. "I've had it for a while but forgot about it. Found it in the back of my closet this morning." She said it so casually, like it wasn't even worth a second thought. But I knew her wardrobe like the back of my hand. Elena wasn't the type to forget about something as nice as that scarf. It was soft, dark green, and looked expensive. "Really? I don't think I've ever seen you wear it before," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. She shrugged, not even looking at me. "I don't know, Jason. It's just a scarf." But it wasn't just a scarf. It was another thing on the growing list of things that didn't add up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment from the past few weeks in my head. The dreams were getting worse, more vivid. Now I could almost see the man's face, a shadowy outline just out of focus. I looked over at Elena, her breathing slow and steady as she slept. She looked peaceful, but I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff. I needed to know if I was losing my mind or if there was something real behind the dreams. I couldn't keep living in my head, replaying the same doubts over and over. The dreams, the scarf, the perfume, the way she smiled at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. It all added up to something. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had to stop ignoring the signs. But even as I convinced myself I was doing the right thing, I couldn't shake the guilt. Elena wasn't just my wife. She was my best friend, the person I'd built my life around. The idea of snooping, of doubting her, made me feel sick. But the alternative, staying in the dark, letting my imagination run wild, felt worse. The first time I checked her phone, it wasn't intentional. She'd left it on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I was grabbing coffee, trying to shake the fog of yet another restless night, when the screen lit up. A notification. At first, I didn't even process what I was looking at. Just a name, Adam. I froze, staring at the screen. It wasn't a name I recognized. Not a coworker, not a friend she'd mentioned. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Don't jump to conclusions, I told myself. It's probably nothing. But when the notification disappeared, I found myself reaching for the phone. My hand hovered over it, trembling. I hated myself in that moment. This wasn't me. I wasn't the kind of guy who spied on his wife. But I couldn't stop. I unlocked her phone with the code I'd known for years. Her messages were clean, almost too clean. Most of the conversations were short, mundane exchanges with coworkers, her sister, a group chat with her old college friends. But there was no Adam. It didn't make sense. I swiped through the contacts looking for the name, but it wasn't there. And then it hit me. What if she deleted it? The thought was like a knife twisting in my gut. I put the phone back where I found it, my hands shaking. The name Adam started haunting me. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter, but every time I saw Elena, the name was there, hovering in the back of my mind. Who was he? A coworker, a friend, someone she ran into at the gym? One night, as she sat across from me at the dinner table, I decided to ask. "You've been working a lot lately," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "How's the team holding up?" She looked up from her plate, her expression unreadable. "The usual, everyone's stressed. I swear some of these clients act like the world's going to end if their logo isn't perfect." I nodded, poking at my food. "Anyone new join recently?" She shrugged. "Not really. Why?" "No reason. Just curious." I watched her closely, searching for any flicker of recognition, but her face was a mask of calm. A few days later, I got my first real clue. Elena had left her laptop open on the couch while she went to get ready for a dinner party. She'd been in a rush, running late from a meeting, and didn't bother to close her tabs. As I passed by, something caught my eye. A name at the top of an email chain. Adam B. My stomach dropped. I told myself not to look, to leave it alone. But I was already sitting down, scrolling through the email. It was from him, friendly, professional, but there was a tone in the words that I didn't like. Too familiar. I read it twice, trying to decide if I was overreacting. "Hey, Elena, just wanted to say thanks for staying late last week. I really appreciate your insight. You always know how to make things better. Let me know if you have time for coffee this week. There's something I'd like to discuss. Adam." It didn't sound incriminating, not on the surface, but the words stuck with me. You always know how to make things better. I closed the laptop quickly, my pulse racing. When she came back into the room, I tried to act normal, but I could barely look at her. That night, the dream came back worse than ever. This time, I wasn't just watching her on the bridge. I was running toward her, screaming her name. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't close the distance. The fog swallowed her, and the man beside her turned to look at me. His face was clear now, sharp and unfamiliar. I woke up gasping, my chest heaving. Elena was already awake, sitting up beside me. Jason, are you okay? Her voice was soft, concerned, but it only made me feel worse. Yeah, I said, wiping the sweat from my face. Just a bad dream. She reached out to touch my arm, her fingers warm against my skin. Do you want to talk about it? I shook my head. It's nothing. Go back to sleep. Over the next week, I started noticing more. The way she always seemed to have an excuse for why she was late. The way she kept her phone closer than usual. She started getting texts at odd hours, her face lighting up with a mixture of excitement and guilt. One night, as she stood in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, I made a decision. I was going to find out the truth. By the time I reached my decision, the guilt was gone, replaced by something sharper, determination. I had to know the truth. Whether I liked it or not, the threads were unraveling, and I was done standing by as the seams of my life came apart. Elena was out for the evening, something about meeting her friend Megan for drinks. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. But now I couldn't ignore the way she'd been quiet all afternoon, or how her phone chimed just as she was leaving, making her glance at it with a flicker of what looked like anxiety. Don't wait up, she'd said with a smile before closing the door behind her. I sat on the couch for a long time after she left, staring at the spot where her laptop usually sat. My heart was pounding and my hands were sweating. Just let it go, I told myself. She's your wife. You're supposed to trust her. But trust felt like a fragile thing lately, like it could shatter if I breathed too hard. And so, when I finally stood up and opened her laptop, I told myself it wasn't betrayal. It was survival. Her email was clean, just like her phone. No Adam, no red flags. But the drafts folder told a different story. There it was, an unsent email to Adam B. dated 2 weeks ago. My stomach turned as I opened it. Hi, Adam. I've been thinking a lot about what you said last week, and honestly, I don't know how to respond. I never expected to feel this confused about us. I love Jason, but sometimes it feels like we're just going through the motions. You've made me see things differently, and that scares me. Elena. I stared at the words until they blurred. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. What the hell does that mean? What had he said? What had she felt? I shut the laptop and paced the room, my mind racing. The email wasn't proof of an affair, but it was proof of something. Something big enough that she hadn't sent it. Maybe she was still figuring it out. Or maybe she'd already decided and just didn't have the courage to tell me. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stronger than doubt. It was anger, hot and relentless, burning away the guilt I'd been carrying. When she came home that night, I was waiting. She walked in with the same carefree smile she always wore after a night out. Her cheeks were flushed, and her hair was a little messy from the cold wind outside. But when she saw me standing by the kitchen counter, her smile faltered. Hey, she said, setting her bag down. What are you doing up? I folded my arms, watching her carefully. We need to talk. Her face tightened, just for a second, but then she forced another smile. Sure. What's up? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened a picture I'd taken of the email. I'd snapped it before closing her laptop, the words etched into my memory. I slid the phone across the counter toward her. Care to explain this? She froze, her eyes locked on the screen. Her face drained of color, and for a moment, she didn't move. Then she picked up the phone, staring at the picture like it might rewrite itself if she looked hard enough. Jason, her voice was barely a whisper. Who is Adam? I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. She flinched, setting the phone down with trembling hands. He's just a coworker. I laughed, bitter and hollow. A coworker? Really? Because this doesn't look like something you'd write to just a coworker. It's not what you think, she said quickly, her voice rising. I didn't send it, Jason. I didn't even mean half of what I wrote. I was just venting, trying to sort out my feelings. Your feelings? My voice cracked, and I hated how weak it sounded. About what? About us? Or about him? She opened her mouth to respond but closed it again, her hands twisting together. Tell me the truth, Akin, I said, my voice low. I deserve that much. There was a long silence, the kind that stretches so thin you think it might snap. And then she looked at me, her eyes glassy with tears. "I don't know," she whispered. That was the moment everything broke. The days that followed were a blur. She insisted she hadn't done anything with Adam, that it was just harmless conversations, that she'd never crossed a line. But the trust between us was shattered, and no amount of her pleading could put it back together. I started piecing things together on my own. I checked her phone when she wasn't looking, scrolled through her emails, and even searched for Adam on social media. He wasn't hard to find. His profile was polished, filled with pictures of work events and group outings. I found one photo that made my stomach drop, a group selfie at some bar, with Elena standing beside him, smiling. She'd never mentioned that night. The final straw came when I decided to follow her one evening. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I needed answers. She'd told me she was going to a late meeting at work, but instead of heading downtown, she drove to a small cafe on the edge of town. I parked a few spaces away, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might shatter. She walked inside, and a moment later, a man joined her at the table. I didn't need to see his face to know who it was. Adam. They sat close, their heads tilted together as they talked. She reached across the table, her hand brushing his, and just like in the dream, she smiled at him. A soft, intimate smile I hadn't seen in months. I stayed in the car, frozen in place, as the truth finally came crashing down around me. I stayed in the car for what felt like hours, staring at them through the cafe window. Time moves strangely, sometimes too fast, sometimes impossibly slow. Elena and Adam leaned close as they spoke, their faces calm, unhurried, and unbearably familiar. I thought I might see guilt on her face, some flicker of shame, but there was nothing. Just ease, like she belonged there with him. It wasn't the handbrush that did me in, though that had been bad enough. It was the way she laughed at something he said, throwing her head back like she hadn't a care in the world. It was the way she used to laugh with me when everything between us had been good, before the dreams, the silence, and now this. I should have walked away, driven home, given myself time to process what I was seeing. But I didn't. Instead, I got out of the car, my breath fogging in the cold air, and walked straight into the cafe. The little bell over the door jingled as I stepped inside, but they didn't notice me at first. They were too caught up in their little world, their heads tilted close like they were sharing secrets. I stood there for a moment, just watching them, my fists clenched at my sides. "Elena," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She froze mid-laugh, her head snapping up to look at me. For a second, her face was blank, like she couldn't process what was happening. Then her eyes widened, and she pushed back from the table so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "Jason," she said, her voice high and panicked, "what are you doing here?" Adam turned to look at me, his face calm but curious. He was younger than I expected, with a neatly trimmed beard and a too-perfect smile. I hated him on sight. "I think that's my question," I said, my voice low and tight. "What are you doing here, Elena?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her hands fluttered in her lap like she didn't know what to do with them. "Is this him?" I asked, nodding toward Adam. My voice was steady, but inside I was shaking. "Is this the guy you've been lying to me about?" "Jason, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Let's not do this here." "Why not?" I snapped. "You didn't seem to mind doing this here." Adam finally spoke, his tone calm and infuriatingly polite. "Look, man, I think you're misunderstanding the situation." "Don't," I said, cutting him off. My voice was loud enough to draw a few stares from the other customers. "Don't talk to me like I'm an idiot. I know exactly what's going on here." Elena stood then, stepping between us like she thought I might hit him. "Jason, stop. You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" I laughed bitterly. "You're meeting another man behind my back, and I'm the one making a scene?" Her face crumpled, her hands reaching out to touch my arm, but I stepped back before she could. "Jason, it's not what you think." "Don't," I said, my voice cracking. "Don't stand there and lie to me." For a moment, we just stood there, the three of us locked in a silent standoff. Adam looked uncomfortable now, shifting in his seat like he wanted to disappear. "Good." Let him squirm. "I think I should go," he muttered, grabbing his coat. Yeah, I think you should, I said, glaring at him. He didn't say another word, just gave Elena a quick look, something unspoken passing between them, and then walked out. The ride home was suffocating. Elena and I didn't speak as I drove, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. I could feel her glancing at me, could almost hear her scrambling to come up with something to say, but I didn't want to hear it. Not yet. When we got home, I went straight to the bedroom, shutting the door behind me. She followed a few minutes later, her voice soft and pleading. Jason, please, let me explain. I turned to face her, my chest tight with anger and something I couldn't name. Explain what, Elena? That you've been sneaking around with another man? That you've been lying to my face? It's not like that, she said quickly. Adam and I, we're just friends. I swear I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Friends? Do you always write unsent love letters to your friends? Do you always meet them at cafes and hold their hands? Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Then why did it? I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. Why the hell did it, Elena? Was I not enough for you? Did you get bored? She shook her head, her sobs choking her words. It wasn't like that. I was confused. I, I don't know, Jason. I don't know what I was thinking. I stared at her, my chest heaving, my mind spinning. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was just a mistake, something we could fix. But the image of her with Adam was burned into my brain. You lied to me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Over and over again. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now? I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Jason. I'll do anything to make this right. Please, just don't give up on us. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The weight of her betrayal was too much. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know if we could come back from it. The house felt suffocating. The silence was heavy, pressing down on me as if the walls themselves were caving in. Elena and I hadn't spoken since the fight. She stayed in the guest room giving me space, but it didn't help. Everywhere I turned, I saw her, her shoes by the door, her scarf draped over the back of a chair, her favorite mug sitting in the sink. Each reminder twisted the knife a little deeper. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her sitting across from Adam, her hand brushing his, her smile so damn soft it made my chest ache. And worse, I saw her standing on that bridge again, holding his hand as she disappeared into the fog. The dreams had been a warning, a gut instinct I'd ignored for too long. By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, not excuses, not apologies. I needed the truth. I found her sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy and red from crying. She looked up when I walked in, her lips parting as if she was about to say something, but I held up a hand to stop her. Don't, I said, my voice hoarse. Not yet. Just tell me the truth, Elena. I don't want the sanitized version. I don't want you to spare my feelings. I just want the truth. She nodded slowly, setting the mug down. For a moment, she just stared at her hands, twisting the silver wedding band on her finger. I didn't sleep with him, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, but they didn't bring the relief I thought they might. But you wanted to, I said. It wasn't a question. She flinched, her shoulders curling inward. I don't know, she admitted. At first it wasn't like that. We were just talking, about work, about life. But somewhere along the way, it shifted. He made me feel seen, Jason. Like I wasn't just someone's wife or someone's employee. He made me feel special, I cut in, my voice sharp. Is that it? He made you feel special. Her silence was answer enough. I leaned against the counter, my hands gripping the edge so hard my knuckles turned white. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To us? I know, she said, her voice breaking. I know I've hurt you, and I hate myself for it. But I didn't mean for this to happen. I was lost, Jason. I didn't know how to tell you how I was feeling. So you told him instead, I said bitterly. You gave him what you couldn't give me. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I might. I just felt empty. We talked for hours, or maybe it was minutes. Time felt slippery, like it didn't matter anymore. She admitted that things with Adam had gone further than she'd intended, that the emails, the coffee dates, the late-night texts had crossed a line she couldn't come back from. But she swore it hadn't gone further than that, swore she hadn't slept with him. Does it matter? I asked, my voice cracking. Does it really make a difference? You still betrayed me, Elena. You chose him over me, over us. I didn't choose him, she said, her voice rising. I was confused, but I never stopped loving you. Loving me? I laughed bitterly. If this is your idea of love, I don't want it. Her face crumpled, and for a second I hated myself for the words. But I couldn't take them back. They were the truth, raw and ugly as they were. That night I packed a bag. She watched me from the doorway of our bedroom, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. Jason, she said, her voice trembling, please don't go. We can fix this. We can go to therapy, start over, anything you want. Just don't give up on me. I zipped the bag slowly, not looking at her. I didn't give up on you, Elena. You gave up on us the moment you let him into our lives. Her sobs followed me as I walked out the door, but I didn't look back. I spent the first week at a friend's house, drowning in the noise of my own thoughts. Every memory of Elena felt tainted now, like they weren't mine anymore. They belonged to some stranger who didn't know the woman he'd married. People always say time heals all wounds, but I didn't feel like I was healing. I felt like I was bleeding out, slowly and quietly, while the rest of the world moved on without me. Elena called a few times, left voicemails I couldn't bring myself to listen to. I couldn't even look at the text she sent. The idea of hearing her voice, of reading her words, felt like a fresh wound waiting to open. A month passed before I made my final decision. I met her at a coffee shop, not the one where I'd caught her with Adam, but somewhere neutral, somewhere that didn't feel like it belonged to either of us. She looked different, thinner, paler, like she hadn't slept in weeks. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered why we were here. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice steady. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I figured, she whispered. We talked about logistics, the house, the finances. Who would take the dog? It was clinical, detached, like we were dismantling a business instead of a marriage. When it was over, she reached across the table, her hand hovering over mine. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking, for everything. I pulled my hand away. So am I said. Then I stood up and walked out, leaving her behind. The dream stopped after that. The bridge was gone. The fog lifted. I still thought about her sometimes, of course. Love doesn't disappear overnight, but it changes. It fades. And eventually, it makes room for something new. I wasn't there yet, but I would be, one step at a time. And this time, I'd be the one walking away.